They thought they were facing humans, but they faced a winter that turned them into statues of ice. They entered as conquerors and left as ghosts. Listen to the story of the army swallowed by the frozen hell.
As for you, before we begin this deep and calm journey, leave your mark on our channel by hitting the subscribe and like buttons so you can easily find our content next time. And now, take a deep breath, close your eyes, lie down, and let sleep creep in.
Hitler's armies rushed towards Russia with absolute confidence, as if the road was paved before them with victory. The tanks advance quickly, the soldiers fill the roads, and the cities fall one after another. In the beginning, everything seemed to be going according to plan, but as soon as winter approached, the scene changed completely. The roads drowned in mud, supplies were disrupted, and with the first wave of cold, the real enemy appeared. The Russian winter, storms that show no mercy, harsh cold, and soldiers dropping from frost before bullets struck them. Thus the campaign turned from a confident invasion into a military tragedy that changed the course of the whole war. We hope you support this work with a like and subscription, as that helps us continue and provide more of these gripping tales. The first days of the campaign, the German forces rushed into the Russian depth with unprecedented speed. Thousands of soldiers moving in organized formations, tanks paving the way, and heavy artillery striking without stopping. Everything was suggesting that victory was near, and that Moscow would fall just as many cities fell before it. The general feeling in the ranks of the German army was a mixture of confidence and arrogance, for they had accustomed to quick victories in Western Europe, and they did not expect a different resistance in the east. The small Russian villages fall one after another, the roads fill with prisoners, and supplies are transported on huge wagons that do not stop. Soldiers sing sometimes while they walk, laughing around small fires. They write letters to their families telling them that the war in Russia is a matter of weeks. The newspapers in Berlin repeat the same tone. Their headlines speak of a lightning advance and of an army that is invincible. But behind this bright scene began to appear the first signs of exhaustion. The distances in Russia are wider than the leaders imagined. The roads are rugged and the forests do not end. Supply lines extend hundreds of kilometers, and any simple breakdown means a delay of days. And yet the soldiers kept advancing with confidence, raising their banners above the villages, and believing that the end is near. The Soviets, for their part, did not surrender. They withdrew slowly, leaving behind them a scorched earth. They burned crops and stored supplies far away, so the enemy would not find what to eat. Whenever the Germans advanced a step, they found before them a barren void, and an army retreating to deeper positions. This simple strategy flipped the equation without the Germans noticing, for they were gaining land but losing time. And with the approach of autumn, the rains turned into mud, and tanks and wagons broke down on the muddy roads. The soldiers began to feel that the road is not as they imagined it, and that the advance is increasing in slowness. But they, despite that continued marching, driven by orders and arrogance, they did not know that what awaits them is more dangerous than any army, and that the real enemy is still on the way. With the end of summer, the Russian earth began to reveal its real face. The rains poured heavily. The roads turned into muddy swamps, swallowing heavy wagons. Every wheel that turns sinks deeper, and every attempt to pull makes the situation worse. The soldiers, who were used to walking with confident steps, became drowning up to the knees in mud, dragging their weapons with difficulty and losing their strength with every meter. The tanks that formed the backbone of the German advance broke down one after another, engines screaming, wheels slipping, and some flipped in trenches filled with water. Warplanes lost their effectiveness too, for primitive airports were flooded by rains and runways were no longer valid for takeoff. Thus, a whole weapon stopped working in moments. Supplies were delayed. Wagons loaded with bread and fuel stuck in mud do not arrive at the right time. Soldiers began to feel hunger and exhaustion, sleeping on wet grounds and waking up with their bodies soaked with cold. The army's morale shook for the first time, and talk of a quick victory retreated before the harsh reality. And in return, the Russians were dealing with the weather as an old ally, knowing the side forest paths, using light wagons, launching sudden attacks on stuck convoys, then disappearing before anyone catches them. The situation increased in danger with the approach of winter. The advance towards Moscow became slower, and soldiers began asking themselves if autumn was this harsh. Then what will happen when the real cold descends? That question alone was enough to plant doubt in an army accustomed to absolute confidence. When temperatures dropped suddenly, the German soldiers felt that the battle took a completely new form. The earth that drowned in mud turned into a solid plate of ice, and the roads where wagons broke down became severely harsh, so that walking over them cut feet and exhausted horses. The northern wind blew without mercy, carrying with it stinging snowflakes, piercing clothes and stinging skin even to blood. The soldiers did not possess what protects them, their coats light, their shoes unlined and their gloves non-existent. Every morning some wake up with frozen fingers turning into a dark blue color, and some lose their limbs completely from the severity of frost. Rifles no longer fire easily, oils froze in their barrels, ammunition malfunctioned, even powerful tanks stopped moving. Their engines froze and their fuel became solid blocks. Supplies are scarce. The bread that arrives late turns into stone that cannot be eaten except after breaking it with axes. Soldiers melt snow in small pots to get a sip of water and share a piece of dried meat between 10 men. Cold made every bite a small victory and made every night a test for survival. As for the Russians, they had accustomed to these conditions. Their soldiers wear thick coats and wool hats covering heads and ears, and their shoes stuffed with fur, moving lightly amidst storms, attacking at night, firing their fires, then disappearing amidst snow. The exhausted Germans could not keep up with them. Every small battle was ending with big losses. The picture flipped completely. A huge army came to break the Soviet Union, became stuck in a frozen front. Soldiers do not fight only a human opponent, but fight cold and hunger and despair. The letters they were writing to their families turned from phrases of victory into screams of distress. Every day passes, leaving behind it hundreds of corpses. Some were not buried because the earth became too hard to dig. At that moment, Hitler and his commanders realized that they entered a war against nature itself, and that the Russian winter was not just the season of the year, but a whole army stronger than cannons and harsher than any enemy they faced before. When German armies approached the outskirts of Moscow, the commanders thought that the Soviet capital would fall, just as other cities fell before. But what they saw before them was completely different. The streets of Moscow turned into fortresses, civilians digging trenches, Soviet soldiers spreading in fortified positions, and heavy snow covering the earth like a natural shield, preventing any quick advance. The Germans were exhausted to the extreme limit, for their exhausted ranks were no longer able to resist. They retreated long kilometers, leaving behind them broken equipment and soldiers who fell in the snow forever. Moscow did not fall. Instead, it turned into a symbol of Russian steadfastness and into a graveyard for Hitler's ambitions in the east. The Russian winter, with all its cruelty, granted the Soviets time and power to flip the scales and turn the largest German military campaign into the beginning of defeat. With the arrival of winter in its most severe stages, all dreams of progress vanished, and nothing remained before the German army but retreat. It was not a normal withdrawal, but a slow collapse of huge armies, finding themselves stuck amidst an icy desert extending without end. Thousands of soldiers retreating in long lines. But these lines were not organized as they were used to, but an exhausted mixture of frozen men and shattered military crews and equipment stuck in snows. The tanks that represented Germany's striking power turned into rigid metal structures, engines frozen by frost, and fuel froze in its tanks. Some were left on roads to be covered by snow like iron graves, witnessing that technology is useless before nature. Wagons full of supplies broke down too, and horses which they tried to use instead of engines collapsed on frozen roads, so they fell one after another until roads filled with their corpses. Soldiers were in a worse condition. Light coats do not protect them from temperatures reaching below 40 under zero. Feet swelled, then turned into black blocks of freezing. Hands stiffened until soldiers lost the ability to hold their weapons. In many locations, men were seen walking without rifles, leaving them in the snow because carrying them became an unbearable burden. Some stopped suddenly, sat on the side of the road to rest, then never rose again. The withdrawal was a journey of torture. Night falls quickly, and storms erase any trace of the road. Soldiers walking hundreds of kilometers amidst winds, hunger gnawing their bellies and thirst unquenchable, because everything around them is ice needing fire to melt it, and fire does not ignite without wood or fuel. Every abandoned Russian hut turns into hope, and every small fire becomes a refuge for dozens of men crowding around it. In the back, Russians chasing without mercy. Soviet infantry units trained to fight in cold, moving lightly amidst snow, attacking at night, striking withdrawing convoys, killing then disappearing between storms. Every attack leaving behind it more corpses and destroyed equipment. Germans did not know rest neither in day nor in night, as if winter and the enemy conspired together to close every outlet. Morale collapsed, officers screaming but no one responds as before, soldiers thinking only of how to survive another day, some divisions scattered completely, men lost in forests and nothing was known about them. Soldiers' letters that arrived at their homes described desperate scenes. We are dying slowly, hunger is killing us, and cold shows no mercy. With these words ended the legend of the army that is invincible. How to survive another day is the only question occupying everyone. Some divisions scattered completely, Men lost in the forests, and nothing was known about them. Soldiers' letters that arrived at their homes described desperate scenes. We are dying slowly. Hunger is killing us faster than the enemy. Snow swallows everything. The leadership in Berlin received these news as a thunderbolt. It was no longer possible to deny the truth. The army that advanced with arrogance up to the gates of Moscow became a defeated army retreating in huge numbers. Thousands of soldiers died in the frost without a shot. Equipment was lost, and the glory promised by Hitler evaporated with the first icy wind. Withdrawal was not just a tactical step, but was the beginning of the refraction. From that moment, the question was no longer when Moscow will fall, but how the Germans will avoid a wider catastrophe. The Russian winter showed them no mercy, and the Russians exploited every moment. Thus a new chapter in the war was written, the chapter of bitter withdrawal, which turned the invaders into lost ghosts amidst the white storms. While the German soldiers continued their withdrawal amid snows, a new enemy began to lethally attack them. The problem was no longer only in the biting cold, but in the absence of provisions, which turned the huge army into weak human lines, searching for anything to keep them alive. Convoys dedicated to transporting food broke down on muddy roads first, then the ice swallowed them later. Some wagons are stuck until today in the Russian lands covered by layers of snow, as if they are forgotten graves. With the stoppage of supplies, nothing reached the soldiers except fractions of dry bread. Small rations that do not suffice a child, let alone an army fighting a war. Hunger forced soldiers to search everywhere. Some of them searched in destroyed villages, knocking on abandoned doors and turning over cold ovens, searching for remnants of flour or a piece of dry potato. Others picked up grain husks from the ground to boil them in water, hoping it might grant them a temporary feeling of satiety. In extreme cases, horses that were pulling wagons were slaughtered. Soldiers ate their meat raw or grilled on small secret fires, because the cold does not allow them to wait. With the passing of days, soldiers' bodies began to collapse. Hunger weakens immunity and cold increases the torment. Eyes sunken in their sockets and bodies thinned until bones became prominent under the skin, and the ability to carry weapons faded. Many fell on the road not by a bullet or a shell, but from the emptiness of the stomach. Not by bullets nor by explosion, but by fever and coughing and infections that spread like fire in dry grass. Trenches and temporary huts turned into epicenters for epidemics. Dozens of men sleeping huddled together around a small fire, breathing suffocating air full of smoke so disease transmits with amazing speed. Dry coughing became tragic music heard everywhere, followed by spit mixed with blood. Then a heavy silence for a body that departed life. Cold was the first incubator for this catastrophe. The lung freezes from the inside, and breathing becomes painful like hidden stabs, and breaths cut off even in the smallest movement. With every new day, numbers of those infected with pneumonia increase, and with the absence of medicines, the disease turns into a death sentence. Hunger in its turn added insult to injury, for lean bodies have no strength for resistance, and the small wound resulting from a fall or a scratch turns into a fatal infection. Soldiers' frozen fingers get infected with gangrene and turn into a black color, and some are forced to amputate them with primitive means amidst desperate screams. The battlefield was no longer the danger, but the body itself. became an enemy from within. Disease did not show mercy to officers nor soldiers, for everyone is equal before frost. Some divisions lost half their men without a battle just because of infection. Whoever gets sick is placed on the side of the road, waiting for his end quietly, while his comrades continue marching. They no longer have the ability nor the time to carry their corpses, and thus roads filled with rows of frozen bodies, their eyes open towards the sky, as if witnessing nature's betrayal. As for the Russians, they knew how to exploit this tragedy. Their soldiers, accustomed to winter and own heavier clothes and simpler but nutritious food, and their morale was higher, and every time the Germans weakened, the Russians appeared more powerful. Every epidemic devouring the Nazi ranks was considered an additional victory in which not a single bullet was fired. The White Plague, as some called it, was not a specific disease, but a mixture of frost and hunger and infection. A cold, silent force swept the front and brought down numbers exceeding what cannons brought down. And with the arrival of midwinter, Hitler's army was no longer facing the Russians, only but facing an internal collapse that cannot be stopped. The German army in Russia no longer resembled the force that launched with confidence towards the east. Pale faces and exhausted bodies and wandering eyes were saying everything. Soldiers who were used to attack and speed became prisoners of helplessness, moving with intermittent steps over snow, as if they are ghosts searching for a refuge that does not exist. In the beginning, everyone was talking about the near victory and about entering Moscow and raising flags over the Kremlin. But with the passing of days and with every harsh night dropping dozens of men, conversations changed. No one speaks of victory anymore, but of survival. Every conversation between soldiers revolves around food and around torn shoes, or around a friend who froze in the night and never woke up. Morale collapsed from the inside before the enemy defeated it. Officers scream orders, but words fall into a void. No one possesses enough strength to reply, and no one believes that screaming will change anything. Even military songs that used to fill the march stopped, and a heavy silence replaced them. A silence broken only by coughing or a scream of pain from a soldier who lost his fingers in frost. Letters written by soldiers reflect this tragedy. Some were just a confession of despair. We are melting in the ice we will not return as we left. Everything ended here. Others wrote their last words on paper scraps before the snow buried them. These letters that arrived at Germany turned the popular mood upside down and showed that the Eastern Front was no longer a theatre for victory, but an open graveyard. Russians, in their turn, exploited this psychological collapse intelligently. Their night attacks and sounds of their horns and their shouts amidst storms were all tools to break what remained of the enemy's steadfastness. Many German soldiers surrendered without fighting. They raised their hands, not because they lost the weapon, but because they lost the desire for life. Psychological defeat was harsher than cold and hunger. Soldiers were no longer soldiers, but bodies searching for a quick end. Nothing remained before them except two choices: slow death amid snow or captivity at the hands of Russians, and both seemed better than staying in this white nightmare. Thus, the promise of victory preached by Hitler turned into a deadly deception. The army about which was said it is invincible became an example of refraction, and an army stuck between snows waiting for a merciless fate, while German armies were retreating and collapsing amid snows. The Soviets were preparing for a decisive strike. The winter that crushed the Germans was for the Russians a familiar environment they accustomed to generation after generation. Soldiers wear thick coats and their armies trained to fight in cold. Behind Moscow, new defensive lines were prepared and additional forces mobilized coming from Siberia. Strong men who experienced fighting amidst ice. With the beginning of December, Soviet leaders gave the signal. Thousands of cannons began shelling frozen German positions, and the sky filled with the buzz of planes. Russian soldiers rushed across snows as if they are part of nature itself, moving quickly. While their opponents are stuck in their place, the attack was sweeping. Germans who barely stand on their feet found themselves under fire that does not calm. Their defensive lines collapsed and their units scattered, and broken tanks were left in their places to become spoils for the Russians. Frozen soldiers could not carry their weapons. Some surrendered immediately and others fled, leaving everything behind them. Moscow survived, but more than that, became a symbol for a new birth. News about the Soviet attack spread in the world and confirmed that Hitler no longer owns an army that is invincible. Europe, which believed that Germany is undefeated, began to see the first crack in the wall of its power. The German withdrawal was humiliating. Hundreds of kilometers the Nazi army lost in a few weeks. Tens of thousands of soldiers fell between dead and captive, and equipment left at the front was a witness to a bitter defeat. It was not just a retreat, but the beginning of the end for the largest military campaign launched by Hitler. The Russian winter was not a passing season, but a weapon that changed the course of history. Armies came with absolute confidence, fell before harsh nature, and a people who refused surrender. And from between white snows the truth emerged. Hitler was not defeated in Moscow by Russian cannons only, but defeated before the power of cold and hunger and despair, before a winter that made its own legend, and thus ended the invasion that began as a dream of lightning victory to turn into the beginning of the fall of the Third Reich. And the story of the Russian winter is still told until today as one of the greatest witnesses that nature itself may become the strongest weapon in war.